We're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 24 today. And Matthew 24 is probably one of the most, we talk about contentious verses, ambiguous verses in the Bible, but Matthew chapter 24 is the most ambiguous and contentious chapter in the whole Bible. There is something very unique about this chapter. So I've prepared an outline for you. If you did not get one when you walked in the door, would you just hold your hand up right now? We'd be glad to bring you one. Somebody is coming from the back. And I would really suggest you guys go out on a limb and fill this out as I'm going through the sermon, because you're going to get some things ironed out for you. Debbie, he's got one more. You're going to get some things ironed out for you that are going to be very profitable and comforting. So you'll want to fill this out. Matthew chapter 24, this will be the largest section of text that we've read. Normally we do 4 or 5 verses when we exposit the text. But the thing that we need to key in on is 34 verses down the road. So we're going to go ahead and read a large portion of text today, and then we'll come back and we'll exposit only a couple parts of it. The title of the sermon is The Date of the Son of Man Coming. Church of Christ is going to be the first one to give the date for the coming of the Son of Man. Should be excited about that. Other churches have tried to do it and they've all been wrong. So hopefully we'll be a little bit closer to the truth than they were. The date of the coming of the Son of Man, chapter 24, verses 1 through 35. And we'll start in verse 1. Jesus left the temple and was going away, and when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, "You see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." And as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" And Jesus answered them, "See that no one leads you astray, because many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. And see that you're not alarmed, because this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places." Verse 12, "And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on a housetop not go down to take what is in his house, and let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas, for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved, but for the sake of the elect of those days will be cut short. Then, if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you this beforehand. So if they say to you, look, he's in the wilderness, do not go out. If they say, look, he's in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. And immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heaven to the other. For verse 32, from the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branches become tender and puts out its leaves, you know that summer is near. See also, when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gate. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. You guys familiar with that text? We've heard it a time or two. I don't know if you're aware, but this is probably one of the most contentious, ambiguous chapters in the entire Bible. And there are several denominations that do a lot of different things with this text. So I would like to kind of walk you through it slowly and hopefully show you that if we pay close attention, there are some clues embedded in the text that are good, concrete, objective, sound things that we can take at face value. And some of those concrete things that we can take at face value may help us understand some of the more ambiguous, weird-sounding language. For many of you, as we go through that text, it may have been kind of like looking at a surgeon's tray of tools or a dentist's tray of tools. You're seeing stuff, and you go, oh, well, that thing there kind of scares me. That one there, I'm not sure what that does, but I hope that that's not used on my mouth. And we have these feelings about certain things that we're seeing here, and that's about the way this text is. We see something that looks familiar, but then we see something scary, and then we see something that looks like it's going to be the end of the world, but then we see something that looks like something else. And so there is a lot of confusion as we approach a text like this. I want to give you a couple very important definitions. These are on your worksheet. And these might help us understand why do so many people come to so many different conclusions when we're reading the exact same words. And the way that critical hermeneutic answers this question is this word schema. This word schema, it's a very important word, very important that you understand it because it will help you understand why people come to different conclusions. So the definition for schema is the web work of information that we imagine whenever we read a word or hear a phrase. When we hear a word or see a phrase, we automatically imagine or get a vision of something. And because we so clearly get the vision of something, when somebody else sees that word or that phrase and they see a different vision, there's like a train wreck that happens and you have to like sit back and go, how in the world did you get to that conclusion? And we need to understand that there are schemas. Every one of us has gotten used to attributing a certain idea to a certain word. So let me give you a couple examples of how this might play out. The word bug. You might think, well, everybody knows what a bug is, don't they? That should be easy enough. It's only 3 letters. Everyone's seen one. But look at what can happen. If you're a gardener, then that's probably what you thought of, right? But what if you're a car mechanic? That's probably what you thought of. Do you see how your own personal exposure to different things can make us come to different conclusions, even though we're looking at the same word? A computer programmer, when he hears the word bug, he has nightmares because that means the computer program that he wrote doesn't work and he needs to go back and find the bug. Let me give you another word, guys. Vacation. If you've ever talked to your family or gotten excited about, we're going on a vacation, everybody has a different schema when they hear the word vacation. Everybody gets a different idea of what that word means. For some people, when they see the word vacation, they think that. Right? But for some people, when they see the word vacation, they think that. How many of you are the first one? We're all too old. We snap a neck. Yeah, this one's probably more my speed here. So that's the idea of a schema. We all get a different picture, even though we're looking at the same word. That is going to be so valuable for us, guys. So this is what happens when people begin reading Matthew chapter 24. There are tons of different words, there are tons of different phrases, and everybody's mind jumps to an understanding of what that word or phrase means. But let's learn right now that that doesn't mean that that is what Matthew meant when he wrote that word or phrase. So the job, our hermeneutic job, when we exposit the Scripture, when we exposit the text, we have to be willing to overlook our own schemas, the conclusions that we come to in our mind. And we've got to be willing to do the due diligence, the hard work of finding out, is there a way to know what Matthew was thinking when Matthew wrote that word? What was Matthew's schema for that word? And that's what we need to get to the bottom of when we read Scripture, not our own personal schemas. So that's what I want to do. We're going to do several sermons on chapter 24. It'll take several sermons. And we'll look at certain ones of these phrases and we'll ask, what is my schema? What do I think of? And then we'll see if there's a way to get closer to finding out, what did Matthew think of when he said that? That's going to take several weeks, and I want to try to make it very simple because, in all honesty, this passage is very unique, and it would really take some special tools in order to arrive at the correct schema for the words that are in this passage. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in just a minute. But here are some of the ideas, words and phrases that we already looked at in the text. Let's just kind of glance over them real quick. The sun going dark, the moon goes dark, and the stars are going to fall out of heaven. Do you get a schema when you read that? Do you get an image of something happening? In the same text, we have the heaven and earth will pass away. Wars and rumors of wars. There's going to be a great tribulation. Do you get certain ideas about what that means? The final one, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Do you get your own image of what you think that means? We all do. Let's just admit it. We all think we understand what most of that stuff means. So we're going to have to be careful because we are going to use some tools to find out what Matthew meant by those words, and it may challenge us to have to let go of the schema that we have in our mind in order to embrace the true message that Matthew was trying to convey. Another aspect that leads to the difficulty in understanding Matthew 24 is Matthew 24 is an apocalyptic. It's very important that we understand that, because that means we can't read Matthew 24 the way we read all the other chapters of Matthew, because Matthew chapter 24 is specifically written as an apocalyptic. If you're not aware of what an apocalyptic is, the most famous one is the book of Revelation. I'm about to show you all of the things that are going to happen in the future, but the Jews, way back in the Old Testament, had developed, maybe it was God that gave the Jews the language of apocalyptic. And apocalyptic literature is this hyperbolic, overemphasized, radical sayings that were meant to convey faith and security in an audience of people that was going to see tribulation and trouble. This was supposed to encourage them. So it's written a very special way, a very certain way, which means we need to know something about apocalyptic literature in order to read this correctly. So let me give you a few clues. Genres of literature. When you hear someone start to say, roses are red, violets are blue, your mind gets turned on and you realize what's about to come. 2 more lines that rhyme, probably a husband that forgot about Valentine's Day and he's making a last-ditch effort to save his hide. Hon, roses are red, violets are blue. Something, something, something. All right, we hear that. I've never had to do one of those. Here's another genre of literature. Once upon a time, in a land far, far away. Did you feel yourself slip into, oh, okay, I know, I'm slipping into Walt Disney cartoon, fairy tale princess. I'm slipping into a fairy tale. If we hear something, here's a different one. If you're reading in a book and you read something like, the engine timing needs to be set to 3 degrees before top dead center. Does anybody ever remember those days? We don't do that anymore. 3 degrees before top dead center. We recognize what kind of literature that is. That kind of literature makes us sit straight in our seats, makes us realize I better have the right tool, I better know what I'm doing, I better do it exactly the way I'm told to do it, or this car is never going to run. So that's the nature of genres of literature. Well, apocalyptic literature is a specific genre, and we need to know how to read that. That's going to be some challenging. Let me give you the definition here. Apocalyptic literature. It's a literary genre in which a supernatural being reveals cosmic mysteries or the future to a human intermediary. So, an easier definition, an apocalyptic is when God sends a messenger to tell His people what's going to happen in the future. Now, the issue with that is it is written a very certain way, and there is what we call a stockpile of images that are used to convey a specific idea. So what you think when you see one of these stockpile images is probably not going to be what that image really means in ancient apocalyptic literature. That is a very valuable insight. Apocalyptic literature, we see it. The book of Revelation is written like that. Anybody ever found Revelation to be difficult to understand? It's difficult because we don't understand apocalyptic literature. But you should know that when the original church read the book of Revelation, it made sense to them because they were familiar with that kind of genre of literature. It was developed after the return from Babylon in the Jewish nation. So this is a type of literature that God gave specifically to Israel. And there are lots of types. I gave you Revelation, certain chapters in Isaiah, certain chapters in Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Zechariah are written in this unique style. And now we learn Matthew chapter 24 is written in this unique style. Let me go to the book of Revelation and see how Jesus describes that, hey, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm taking what God is showing me, the future, and I'm revealing it to you. Look at what he says, Revelation chapter 1 and verse 1. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants the things that must soon take place. That lets you know this is apocalyptic. It's going to be written in a very certain way. This is a literary genre that is very difficult because we're not familiar with it. And there's one other aspect of this literary genre that makes it more difficult for us. Sometimes the committee that wrote a particular translation of the Bible can be so bent on their schema, what they think something means, that instead of giving you the literal translation from the Greek, they have already interpreted the meaning and they've translated what they think the meaning is rather than letting you know what the actual Greek words were. I think I've got some examples for you. I do. We're going to take verse 3 in your Bible of our passage today, and I want to show you 3 different translations of verse 3. The first one is the NIV, and it says, "What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" I would give that a C. That's okay. It might be as close as you're going to get in the English, but it's not giving you the literal idea of the text. Look at how the King James Version, look at what the King James does differently. King James was translated this, "What shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?" Wow. So the translators that gave us the King James did not give you the literal phrase. The literal phrase that they translated end of the world, the literal phrase is completion of the age. That's the Greek phrase, the completion of the age. But the King James translators read that in the Greek, the completion of the age, and they jumped to their own schema and they said, oh, that means the end of the world. They may or may not be right about that. But if you were studying the King James, you would never know that that is not the correct translation. Let me give you one more. Notice how the Young's literal translation, notice how it differs. What is going to be the sign of your presence and of the end of the age? Now there is a difference between thy presence and thy coming. And to be honest with you, Young's literal translation, what will be the sign of your presence, is the better translation. Difficult, and even more difficult if you're using a translation that has already done the thinking for you. So what I want to do, guys, I think some of this information is valuable, but I also don't want to overwhelm you and make it impossible. So what I want to do is I want to show you some of the obvious, concrete, unambiguous phrases that we can definitely draw conclusions from. And that will help set up a framework for how to interpret the other passages that are ambiguous. And this is going to help quite a bit. So that's going to be our work for the next few weeks. What are some of the obvious things in the text that can help us put a box around our interpretation? Today, I'm only going to give you two things that we're going to try to figure out today. The first one, your sermon topic points, is going to be, let's determine the date of the coming of the Son of Man. Your personal schema might already be telling you, Mr. Preacher Man, nobody knows the date. That's your personal schema. Let's see what you think when we get done with our text today. Let's see if we can figure that out from the text. What is the date of the coming of the Son of Man? And then once we figure that out, we will know the answer to the second question. Is the phrase, the coming of the Son of Man, is that the same thing as the second coming of Christ? Or could those be two different things? Those are the two things we want to answer in this sermon. I want to show you how we do it so you can develop some confidence in realizing if we are good Bible students, we can come to good conclusions. So let's walk back through our text, and what we want to look for is a time signature in the text that we just read. Is there anything in the text that would go ahead and tell us the time frame, or maybe is there not? So let's walk back through our text. You kind of start skimming down. A lot of confusing stuff, a lot of weird dental tools that we don't know what to do with, till we come down to verse 27. Verse 27, we kind of grab onto the theme that we're looking for. Verse 27, as lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. So even though we don't understand very much, what we do understand is all of this is talking about this unique phrase, the coming of the Son of Man. At least we know what the context is. We jump on down a little bit. We keep reading. Verse 30. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will, here we go, see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. So I think we're getting closer and closer to doing a good job. This whole chapter 24 is about the coming of the Son of Man. But we're looking for a time reference, and we're running out of verses. There's only 4 more verses in the chapter. We're looking for a time reference. Hey, let's try verse 34. Verse 34. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Did that wake you up at all? Clear, unambiguous, objective, concrete verse. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all of these things have taken place. According to what we find out in Matthew 24, verse 34, in the 21st century, as we read this text, in the 21st century, we can deduct from verse 34 that from our perspective, this is not a future event that we're still waiting for. What we deduct is that whatever chapter 24 is talking about, it already happened in that first century AD during the lifetime of the people that Jesus was talking to. Your generation is not going to pass away. You guys are going to see all of these things happen. Now, depending on what your schema has been in the past, when you've read all of that we've read, I think it's fair to say most of us always probably thought he was talking about the end of time, Judgment Day, the second coming of Christ. But now we have to do something that theologians struggle with all the time. When you come to a clear, objective, concrete phrase that is unambiguous, and that text reveals that my previous understanding was wrong, that is painful. That is difficult. And that is challenging for people to deal with the clear, unambiguous text that is ruining what I thought I had already figured out. And do you know, brothers and sisters, what happens most of the time? People throw up their hands, I don't know, and just keep going in the text. So hopefully I'm going to help you with that today. Hopefully I'm going to tell you that today. Verse 34 tells us this is not a future event to us. This is an event that's already happened in the first century during the lifetime of those disciples, apostles, scribes, and Pharisees. Now, let me give you an example of what people have done with Matthew 34, because if I accept what that is telling me, for many Christians today, that ruins what I thought I knew. It's difficult for me to harmonize all of those phrases that I thought I knew what they were, but this tells me, no, my understanding, my interpretation was wrong. It's difficult. Do you know the number one thing that commentaries say that disagree with us, what they say about this verse? Jesus was wrong. That's the number one interpretation of this. Jesus was wrong because the second coming did not happen in the first century. And they're right. The second coming of Christ did not happen in the first century. But we're not talking about the second coming of Christ. We're talking about the coming of the Son of Man. That's something different. So let me show you what people have done. People have said Jesus was wrong. Jesus was wrong. Yeah. Commentaries have said Jesus was wrong because it never happened. Here is what's terrifying about that. Do you recognize that our schemas can be so powerful in our minds that we would say, I'm right, Jesus must be wrong? Do you guys grasp the magnitude of people not wanting to let go of things that they think they already know? And they will go to the extreme to say, no, I'm right. I'm the one that figured it out. Jesus was wrong. I want to read to you something that C.S. Lewis wrote about this passage. C.S. Lewis said Matthew 24:34 is the most embarrassing passage in the Bible because Jesus was wrong. Look at this quote. C.S. Lewis, this is in a book that he wrote. Some characters are having this dialogue and says, their master told them so. Speaking of the disciples and Jesus. He shared, and indeed he created their delusion. He said in so many words, this generation shall not pass until all these things be done, and he was wrong. He clearly knew no more about the end of the world than anybody else. Can you imagine the gall of C.S. Lewis saying, Jesus was wrong about the end of the world? You guys, that's how powerful our schemas are. That's why we have to be willing to challenge our schemas. Now, there is one verse that we're looking at that creates a time frame for us, and another difficulty for us, mere mortals, mere humans, is by the time we read Matthew chapter 24, do you know what's already happened? We've already forgotten what we read in Matthew chapter 10. We've already forgotten what we read in Matthew chapter 16. We've already forgotten what we read in Matthew chapter 23, which was last week. That is my biggest sadness in life, is that we can't retain very much information. At home, I've got a way where I take a verse and I know how to file that verse. So when I see another verse somewhere else in the Bible that says the same thing, I know how to take that verse and file it with this verse. And luckily, I've been doing that as we've gone through the book of Matthew. So let me show you 2 or 3 other times where Matthew has already said all of this is going to happen in your generation. So let me give you, I would write these down in your text there to corroborate the conclusion that we've come to regarding verse 34. We're going to corroborate that with some other texts. Let me take you to Matthew chapter 10, beginning in verse 21. And I would, in your notes, write down Matthew 10, 21 through 23, and let me share it with you. He's talking about how bad times are going to be. He's describing the same tribulation that is being described in Matthew 24. Brother will deliver brother over to death, and the father his child. And children will rise against their parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. When they persecute you in one town, flee to the next. For truly I say to you, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. Do you see it? Go out and start evangelizing. But you're not going to get done knocking on doors before the Son of Man comes. A second verse that corroborates the idea that the Son of Man will come during your lifetime, during this generation. Let me give you another one, Matthew chapter 16. Matthew chapter 16, and I would put down verses 27 through 28. And here's our verse. For the Son of Man is going to come with His angels in the glory of His Father. And then He will repay to each person according to what he has done. Truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in His kingdom. Whatever you thought before we started the sermon, have you been swayed at all by what we've been seeing? Let me give you one more verse. Matthew chapter 23, verses 34 through 36. This is last week's sermon. I won't ask you to raise your hand if you remember discussing this. Last week, Matthew 23, verse 34. Therefore, this is talking about the Great Tribulation again. Therefore I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify. Some of them you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town, so that on you may come all the righteous blood that has been shed on the earth. Verse 36. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. And the Bible says, on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a thing shall be considered true. I've given you 4. This, you guys, is the hard thing about exegesis, about reading a text and figuring out what Matthew was saying to his audience 2,000 years ago. And the difficulty is, sometimes we're going to be forced to change our schema. Sometimes we're going to be challenged and forced to take what I thought has been true my whole life. But according to these texts that are clear, unambiguous, concrete, and objective, I have to recognize I've been wrong. That is painful, that is difficult, and I've already told you, many people have resorted to say, no, I wasn't wrong, Jesus got it wrong. That's how scary biblical interpretation is. So, we had a kaleidoscope of images that we've probably heard about our whole life. Sun going dark, moon going dark, stars falling, heaven and earth passing away, wars and rumors of wars, great tribulation like never before. You'll see the Son of Man coming on the clouds. And we've always thought that meant the end, judgment day, the second coming of Christ. That's what it looks like. But we've already seen the clear, objective, unambiguous text. 4 different times Matthew has recorded. All of this is going to happen in your generation. You guys are going to see all of this happen. And so we have to force ourselves to rethink then our schema. We still don't know what all those other phrases mean. Now we're confused. And over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to exposit those texts and show you how those texts get used as stockpile apocalyptic imagery. They always mean the same thing. We'll do that in the weeks to come, but here is our clause, verse 34, that I hope you understand clearly and that answers our questions. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass until all these things take place. And so we've looked at 3 other places where Matthew has already said the same thing. And so the answers to our questions, number 1, the coming of the Son of Man already happened in the 1st century. People get terrified when you say that because they think you mean the second coming of Christ happened in the 1st century. That's not what we're saying. So number 2, the answer to number 2, the Son of Man coming on the clouds cannot be the same thing as the second coming of Christ at the end of the world. And what I'm going to reveal to you is the phrase coming on the clouds is an apocalyptic image. So we have to use apocalyptic ideas to define this coming of the Son of Man. But for now, you should know that it is different. It is not the same thing as the second coming of Christ at the end of time. And hopefully our sermon today has made that obvious, even though your brain may have a train wreck happening right now. Let me just give it away right quick. all of this is boiling down to the coming of the Son of Man is an apocalyptic term for judgment and destruction. And so in AD 70, when Rome came to destroy Jerusalem, that was the coming of the Son of Man. That was the apocalyptic fulfillment of judgment and destruction. That's what the coming of the Son of Man means in apocalyptic imagery. Judgment, destruction. Next week, I think I'm doing a sermon completely about that. What is the apocalyptic imagery behind the phrase, the coming of the Son of Man? I'm going to show you several passages in the Old Testament where this phrase was used, I am coming. And it doesn't mean that God physically shows up. Jesus in the book of Revelation, the 7 letters to the 7 churches says, behold, do this, or I will come. He doesn't mean I'm going to physically show up. He means judgment and destruction. That's apocalyptic imagery. Good for us to know that. So the coming of the Son of Man that he is describing here, that's going to happen in your generation, you're going to see it, is when Roman armies surround Jerusalem in 70 AD, destroy Jerusalem.